On today's video, I'm going to be doing the scarf joint for the headstock on this bass guitar that I'm building. This is a tricky cut to make, at least in my experience. For this neck, I'm going to be trying a technique that utilizes a table saw and a jig. I got the idea from a video from Project Electric Guitar, and I'll leave a link to that video in the description. So the first thing we got to do is make sure that this surface, the back surface of our neck blank, is perfectly flat and straight. So how I'm going to do that, because I don't have a proper wood shop or proper equipment, is to use this big sanding block that I made out of the screen door a couple videos ago. I'm going to actually attach the sandpaper to this surface because it's a little bit wider. So first thing I'm going to do is just wipe off all the debris that's on here. Then I'm going to take some 60 grit sandpaper and just cut it into strips, or actually rip it into strips. Okay, so now the next step is I got to cover the block and the back of this sandpaper with some rubber cement. So there's not much left in here. It's a good thing I got a brand new container of it. Okay, now we'll just let that dry for a few minutes. Alright, there we go. Now we just gotta attach this to our table and we can get sanding. Alright, so now I have this neck blank kind of clamped into place. I just screwed some scrap wood into the surface of my workbench with screws kind of pushing this board this way, so it kind of functions like a clamp in a way. So in an attempt to make a better video, I got this white pencil and I'm going to draw some white lines all over this so we can see where we're sanding, and hopefully it will show up a little bit better on camera. Weird. Weird pencil. You know what? This pencil is not good for this. So I'm just going to go back to my regular carpenter's pencil. Okay, so my screen door sanding block appears to have done a nice job getting one smooth flat surface on this board. So now that's off my list, I can move on to the next thing. So the next thing on my list is to get a square edge next to my flat surface. So I just looked at this with a straight edge, and this edge is basically square to this surface. So what I'm going to do is just kind of clean off this glue that's on here. Alright, that's going to be good enough for what we're doing. Oh, that's in there. Alright, so now what we're going to do is cut the scarf joint for our headstock. So from what I've seen online, typically you'll see an angle between 10 and 20 degrees. So we're going to go somewhere in the middle of that. I think we're probably going to go with, let's maybe go with 13 degrees. That sounds like a nice number. So there we go. We got our protractor, I think, set up to 13 degrees. Now, we got to figure out which side of this board we want to be the headstock. Okay, so this side will be our headstock. So we're going to come down 14 inches, which is an extra 3 inches for our length. We're going to mark a line from our square edge, which is this one. Now the next problem I'm going to have is how to cut this thing. So in the past, I've done these by actually cutting this with a handsaw. It's tough to do accurately. So I think what I'm going to try doing this time is using a technique I picked up from a video by a YouTube channel called Project Electric Guitar. And that is to make a jig to use with my table saw to cut this. So if you've watched my other videos, you know I'm always going off about safety. That's just because I've personally had a few close calls. I know a few people who have been less fortunate than that. So I'm very familiar with how dangerous it can be. So if you haven't used tools before and want to get into woodworking, please get some in-person training. It's kind of like driving a car. It looks easy, but without somebody riding in the car with you, showing you how to do it, you won't really learn how to do it safely or properly. So the first thing I'm going to need for this jig is a base. So right here I got some 1/8 inch thick particle board, fiberboard, whatever, hardboard. Ideally, I think I probably have 1/4 inch thick, but this is what I got. I got a factory edge here, so what I'm going to do is just kind of cut off a piece of this. Okay, so now I got the base for my jig. The next thing I got to do is install some kind of fence on here at my desired angle. So I mentioned I was going to do this at 13 degrees. I think I'm going to want to push it through the saw with the fence on this side. So we'll come from this side 13 degrees. There we go. So now we got to put some kind of piece of wood here as a fence. I think probably you'd want to use something a little bit different than a 2x4, but it's what I'm working with. So we're going to be using a 2x4 for this. I just got some super glue here. That'll probably be good. Just spray some activator. Some powerful stuff. All right. Probably don't need to do this, but I'm going to throw a few screws in here. All right, so without the neck blank clamped onto this, you can see how this would work, right? Like it just goes in, holds it at an angle. Seems to be pretty straightforward. Now I'm going to crank my blade all the way up just to make sure I can actually make this cut. And also, I'm going to have to make sure my blade is actually square to the table. Let's get this out of here. So my blade is square to my table. That is the first step. All right, I guess the main thing is we got to make sure that our blade is even high enough to do this. It'll just come through. Okay, so I got this neck blank clamped up to this jig I just made. You can see faintly I have the angled line drawn on the blank. You can see it should exit right at the edge of the jig, just like this. So yeah, as I mentioned, I got this idea from Project Electric Guitar, and he does a lot more precise and looks honestly like he takes a lot more care in his work than I do. I'm just going to copy what he did as far as the table saw aspect of this goes. So he cut this in multiple passes, raising the blade each time. So that's what I'm going to do too, because well, seemed to work well for him, so I'm just going to do the same thing. All right, actually I just set up a bit of an in-feed table here. I think it'll work a lot better if I just have this in-feed table going. So here we go. Okay, so this is what we're dealing with now. Did it work? Yes. Did it work perfectly? No. Would it have worked perfectly if I devoted the care and attention that the Project Electric Guitar put into it? Probably. But this is a danger zone. We do things a little bit differently here. So I will consider this a success. So now we got to think about gluing this up. So the way I'm going to glue it up is like this. So the fretboard is going to cover this joint. This joint will end somewhere between the first and second fret. The other way we could do this is like this, which would put the joint under the headstock, and it will also give us a really long headstock, but I just feel like this is just going to be a little bit stronger. I don't know if that's actually true, but that's what I'm going with. Alright, so the first thing I got to do is just sand these two surfaces, this surface here, and this surface here. I just got to make sure they're good and perfect before I glue them. Obviously, this needs to be a good connection, so that's what I'm going to do right now. This is just wax paper, by the way. I got my Titebond original here. Just gonna put some of this on both of my glue-in surfaces. Alright, so I just got this glued up. I've got the headstock glued onto the neck. I got a couple clamps on there, as you can see. Probably put a third one in the middle of that after I'm done making this little clip here, but I got the majority of the neck held down to the workbench with a couple of clamps. The neck is square to the workbench, right? And then you can see, if we come over here again, I just got a couple of 2x4 chunks I wrapped in wax paper. And then of course, we got some wax paper underneath. The headstock is jammed up against this piece down at the bottom. And yeah, so that actually turned out a lot smoother than I anticipated. Again, I probably didn't put, well, not probably, again, I didn't put nearly as much care and attention into this as Project Electric Guitar did. I'll leave a link to his video in the description if you want to see how to do this, I guess, properly. But this seemed to work for me. Hopefully, once I pull these clamps off of here, I got something I'm happy with. And yeah, so that's it for right now. I'll be back in a few hours to show you how this turned out. Alright, so I waited overnight, and now I'm going to take these clamps off and just see how things turned out. Alright, so there we go. We got our headstock glued on. Scarf joint was a success. So, yeah, beautiful. Let's just see what our headstock angle is. 13. So, it's pretty sweet that worked out. Actually, you know what? Because we actually got to plane this down here, this neck, which will be one of the next things we do. We're gonna be planing the top side surface of this neck, so that might change that angle slightly, but you know, whatever. That's fine. It's still good enough for what we're doing. Okay, so that's it for this video. Turns out this new technique works pretty good. So in the next video, I'm going to be planing down the neck to its final thickness and gluing the ears on the headstock. After that, I'll be gluing on the head veneer, gluing on the heel, cutting the truss rod channel, shaping the fretboard, attaching the fretboard, and final shaping the neck. So if you aren't subscribed and want to see how this turns out, make sure to subscribe. And if you are subscribed, thank you for subscribing and watching my videos. Until next week, talk to you later.